Hey guys, tonight we embark on a slow, meandering walk across one of the most remote and enigmatic places on Earth, Easter Island, also known as Rapa Nui. Picture this: you're stepping off a boat onto volcanic shores where the nearest continent is thousands of kilometers away, and your only companions are waves, seabirds, and nearly 900 colossal stone faces silently judging your every move. No pressure, you probably wouldn't survive long out here without sunscreen or a really solid escape plan. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing how far across time zones we can travel together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of this isolated island, a windswept fragment of volcanic rock marooned in the middle of the South Pacific. The salty breeze whips past you, carrying faint scents of seaweed and damp earth. Your shoes crunch over the uneven, blackened lava fields, and you realize that this landscape has been shaped by both fire and human hands. Your first steps take you inland, following a faint dirt path bordered by low shrubs and the occasional twisted tree clinging stubbornly to life. It feels like you've stepped outside of time, or maybe just onto the set of a particularly legit sci-fi movie. Minimal scenery, maximum isolation. With each step, the silence deepens, broken only by distant gulls and the rhythmic crash of waves behind you. It's easy to imagine the island's first settlers making this same journey centuries ago, their canoes arriving after an epic voyage across uncharted waters. Historians still debate exactly when the first Polynesians set foot here. Some argue around 800 AD. Others suggest it wasn't until several centuries later. Either way, they must have been equal parts fearless and slightly unhinged. You crest a small hill, and there it is, your first real glimpse of the island's most famous residents. From this distance, they're just silhouettes against the sky. But even now, you can sense their weight, their permanence. These aren't just statues. They're guardians, sentinels, or maybe just elaborate expressions of ancient status anxiety. You pause, taking in the vastness of the Pacific stretching endlessly beyond the cliffs. The island, roughly triangular, is about 164 square kilometers, little bigger than Manhattan, but with significantly fewer delis. Its volcanic origins are immediately evident. From the craggy ridges underfoot to the three main extinct volcanic cones that dominate the skyline, to Rapa, Moai, and Rano Raraku. As you continue walking, your footsteps fall into an unconscious rhythm matching the heartbeat of this ancient place. You pass by patches of grassland and isolated stands of eucalyptus, trees and a native species introduced more recently, though they look like they've always been here. That's the thing about this island. It holds onto everything, even the things it probably shouldn't. The wind picks up again, whistling through the sparse vegetation, and you zip up your jacket ears. Even tropical islands can get chilly when they're isolated enough. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnies. Wild horses now roam much of the island, descendants of those brought by missionaries and settlers in the 19th century, oblivious to their accidental role in shaping the landscape. You finally reach a rise that gives you a panoramic view of the coastline curling gently into the distance, the waves crashing ceaselessly against jagged basalt cliffs. Above them, the first line of Moai stands or rather looms at the edge of a field, their backs to the sea, gazing eternally inland. But that's for later. For now, you simply breathe in, letting the salty air fill your lungs. The journey has only just begun, but already you feel the slow pull of the island's strange, quiet gravity. As you descend the hill, you notice how every stone, every plant, seems steeped in time, their edges softened by centuries of exposure. Even the birds here seem less hurried, as if they too have settled into the island's patient rhythm. You spot a weathered sign ahead, its paint peeling from years of salt and sun. It marks the entrance to one of the many archaeological zones, managed by the island's caretakers, both the local Rapa Nui people and international researchers dedicated to preserving this place. You pause, considering whether to continue along the path or veer off into the rougher terrain. But the choice is obvious. You're here to uncover mysteries, after all. And so, with a final glance at the ocean, you turn inland toward the heart of the island, where stone giants and centuries of unanswered questions await you. You step cautiously toward the nearest group of statues, your shoes sinking slightly into the soft volcanic soil. The towering figures come into clearer focus with each stride. Their massive heads tilted ever so slightly forward, their long ears stretched down the sides of their faces like melted candle wax. It feels as though they're watching, judging you for disturbing their centuries-old meditation. You circle around one of the giants, craning your neck to take in its full height. Some moai reach over 10 meters tall, though this one is a more modest 6. Still, the sheer size of it is impressive, especially when you realize these were carved with nothing but stone tools. No bulldozers, no cranes, just sheer determination and, presumably, some very sore backs. Most of the statues you see are facing inland, their backs to the ocean, which feels counterintuitive at first. Shouldn't these silent sentinels be watching for invaders? But here on Rapa Nui, the Moai are believed to embody deified ancestors, watching over their descendants and their lands. You shift your perspective, standing directly in front of one, staring up into its blank, heavy-lidded eyes. It doesn't blink, obviously, but there's a strange presence about it nonetheless, like standing before someone who has already decided you're not worth their time. Your fingers brush against the surface of the stone, rough and pitted from centuries of rain and wind. You notice faint lines, subtle carvings outlining the nose, the lips, the elongated ears, and, in some places, there are remnants of ancient pigments, faint reds and whites, suggesting that these statues weren't always the bare stone monoliths we see today. Once, they were painted, decorated with vibrant colors, their features highlighted to bring them even closer to life. You take a few steps back to admire the whole scene, dozens of moai arranged in lines, like members of an ancient, silent council. Historians still debate exactly how many statues were carved over the centuries. Current estimates suggest nearly 900, but no one knows for sure why this tradition eventually ended. Was it resource depletion, social upheaval, or simply a shift in cultural priorities? A seabird lands atop one of the moai's heads, cocking its own smaller head to look down at you. The juxtaposition is mildly hilarious, this towering emblem of human ambition reduced to little more than a particularly scenic perch for a bored gull. You chuckle softly under your breath, half expecting the bird to start narrating your inner thoughts like some Polynesian version of a Disney sidekick. You glance beyond the statues to the rolling hills and distant volcanic craters, imagining the immense effort it must have taken to move these massive figures from their quarry sites to their final resting places. Some of them weigh up to 80 tons, about the same as a fully loaded semi-truck, and yet here they stand, miles from where they were carved, arranged with such precision that it's difficult to believe this was accomplished without modern engineering. Theories about how the Moai were transported abound, and you'll be exploring some of those soon enough. But for now, you just stand here in awe. As the wind whistles through the empty sockets of these ancient faces, you notice something peculiar. Most of the Moai here are toppled, lying face down or on their backs, fractured in places where the centuries have taken their toll. It's a somber sight, but not entirely unexpected. During periods of social strife, rival clans are believed to have deliberately knocked over each other's statues as acts of war or dominance. It's history's version of flipping someone the bird only with, multi-ton stone sculptures. You keep walking, moving past the fallen giants and the ones that still stubbornly stand, each one unique in its proportions and expressions, yet all unmistakably Moai. Some are squat and broad, others lean and elongated, their chins jutting defiantly toward the sky. Despite their stoic appearances, there's something almost vulnerable about them, as if they're relics of a world that's been slowly forgetting them. Your guidebook, or, more realistically, that Wikipedia article you skimmed before your trip, mentioned that many of the Moai were originally topped with additional structures called pukao, made from red scoria stone. But here, none of those cylindrical hats remain. They're either missing, or perhaps still lying somewhere in the overgrown grass, waiting for another curious traveler to stumble upon them. The sun shifts behind a cloud, casting a softer, diffused light across the field of statues. You feel a sudden, inexplicable kinship with these stone figures, both of you alone, weathered by time, staring silently into a future neither of you fully understands. You take one last look before moving on, leaving these ancient guardians behind, but their eyes, if you can call those heavy brows and shallow sockets eyes, seem to follow you as you walk away. And somewhere deep inside, you'll be thinking about them long after you've left this island. You follow the winding trail that leads toward Rano Raraku, the ancient quarry where the Moai were born. The path narrows as it cuts through patches of coarse grass and low shrubs, the dormant volcano rising steadily in front of you like an immense, brooding guardian. The air here is cooler, heavier, as if the mountain itself exhales ancient secrets with every passing breeze. As you ascend the gentle slope, the landscape begins to change. Massive stone figures, some standing, some toppled, and others still, half buried up the hillside like forgotten chess pieces abandoned mid-game. It's both eerie and beautiful, like walking through a gallery curated by nature and time. This is Rano Raraku, the factory floor of the Moai, and unlike any other place on Earth, you approach one of the statues still partially embedded in the slope, its torso and head emerging from the earth while its lower body remains concealed. For a moment, it feels like you've stumbled upon a sleeping giant, slowly being swallowed by the mountain that once gave it form. You run your hand along its weathered cheek, imagining the artisans who chipped away at this volcanic tuff, transforming rough stone into hauntingly human shapes. Historians widely agree that this quarry was the principal site of Moai production for more than 500 years, but there's still debate over why so many statues, nearly 400, were left unfinished here. Some argue that a sudden societal collapse halted production. Others suggest that these statues were always meant to remain in situ, as part of a sacred landscape. Archaeologists are still excavating, still arguing over the layers of history and meaning literally buried beneath your feet. You notice that the stone here is softer and more workable than the basalt found elsewhere on the island. That's why Rano Raraku was the chosen site for carving, but also why many of the statues here have suffered more erosion over the centuries. Some faces are barely discernible now, their features smoothed by time and rain, as if they're gradually slipping back into anonymity. As you walk further up the slope, you spot a peculiar sight, a moai lying face up, completely horizontal, as if it simply keeled over mid-process. It stretches for over 20 meters, by far the largest ever attempted. Had it been completed and erected, it would have stood as one of the tallest stone statues in human history. But for reasons no one fully understands, it was abandoned here, a colossal work in progress left to the mercy of the elements. You chuckle quietly, imagining the ancient foreman standing beside this behemoth, hands on hips, sighing in frustration. Yeah, maybe we went a little overboard with this one. The trail bends toward the inner crater, and you pause to catch your breath, gazing down into the verdant hollow below. Unlike the barren, windswept slopes around it, the crater floor is lush and green, a hidden oasis of reeds and small ponds. Horses graze lazily by the water's edge, oblivious to the fact that they're standing in what was once a sacred site for the Rapa Nui people. You take a seat on a nearby rock, soaking in the scene. The crater's stillness is profound, broken only by the occasional snort of a horse or the rustle of tall grasses in the wind. It's hard to reconcile this serene landscape with the immense labor that once took place here, the relentless chiseling of stone, the strategic planning of transport routes, the rituals likely performed to bless each new moai. Before it embarked on its journey, you look around and spot a few statues that seem almost ready to walk down the hill themselves. There, backs already freed from the bedrock, but their fronts still anchored. Some lean precariously, as if they're mid-stride, frozen forever in the act of leaving. One of the most fascinating theories about Rano Raraku is that the uncompleted moai represent not failure but intention, that they are part of a grander narrative or cosmology we've yet to fully understand. Some researchers propose that the quarry was more than just a workshop. It was a sacred place where the act of carving itself was a form of devotion, regardless of whether the statue ever stood on an Ahu platform. As you stand up and brush the dust from your pants, you notice the sound of the wind shifting through the hollow spaces between the statues. It produces an odd, low moan, almost like the mountain itself is sighing, tired, perhaps, of holding on to so many unfinished stories. You take one last glance at the sprawling field of half-born moai, their blank faces turned skyward, their fates forever tied to this ancient quarry. And then you start down the path toward the coast, leaving Rano Raraku's silent congregation behind. Their mysteries unsolved but not unappreciated. You follow the path as it meanders away from the quarry, the trail gradually descending toward the coastline. The breeze strengthens, carrying with it the familiar temps of salt and something else, anticipation, perhaps, or just the faint aroma of ancient curiosity. You know what's coming next, the part of the legend that sounds too fantastical to be true. The moai walked. Yes, walked. You've read about it, seen the documentaries where teams of modern researchers attempt to replicate the feat by rocking replica statues forward with ropes and rhythmic teamwork. But standing here, in the very landscape where this might have actually occurred, the idea seems both absurd and weirdly plausible. The prevailing academic debate hinges on how these colossal statues, some weighing up to 80 tons, were transported from the quarry at Rano Raraku to their final positions on platforms scattered around the island. For decades, scholars assumed that massive sledges, rollers, and sheer brute force were the only possibilities. But then came the more recent theory. The statues were walked upright in a carefully choreographed dance, swaying from side to side like a refrigerator being inexpertly moved up a flight of stairs. You imagine the scene now. Dozens of Rapa Nui, men gripping thick ropes tied around a freshly carved moai, chanting in unison as they rock the statue first to the left, then the right, inching it forward across the uneven ground. The sun beats down on their backs, their feet sliding in the dust, their muscles straining with each calculated sway. It's hard not to admire the ingenuity and, frankly, the stubbornness it would take to even attempt such a maneuver. But there's skepticism too. Some researchers argue that while smaller statues might have been transported in this way, the larger moai would have been far too heavy to walk without breaking. Archaeologists still debate whether all moai were moved upright, or if different methods were employed, depending on the size and terrain. As usual with Rapa Nui, the more you learn, the less certain everything becomes. You come across a section of the trail where the ground is noticeably worn, the earth compacted and eroded into faint grooves. Could these be the remnants of ancient transport paths? Some researchers believe so, pointing to similar markings found near several Ahu platforms as evidence of frequent and deliberate statue movement. You pause to imagine what this island must have looked like during the height of Moai construction. Roads bustling with teams of workers, logs dragged across the landscape, or statues teetering along like enormous penguins making their way home. There's an odd charm to the image. These stoic stone faces, expressions forever frozen in serene indifference, being hauled across hills and fields by generations of determined islanders. A horse grazes lazily nearby, swishing its tail at an unseen fly. It glances up briefly at you, as if to say, "Yes, this is all very impressive, but where's the grass?" You can't help but chuckle at how even in such an ancient landscape, life persists in the most mundane, relatable ways. As you walk further, you spot one of the most iconic moai along this part of the island, a statue lying face down, shattered into large fragments. Its base is still embedded in the earth, but its torso and head have long since toppled. This scene, you've read, is common across Rapa Nui evidence, not only of the passage of time, but also of human conflict. Rival clans are believed to have intentionally pushed over each other's statues during periods of warfare and social upheaval. You kneel beside the fallen moai, tracing a crack that runs jaggedly across its weathered surface. How long did it stand before succumbing to gravity or malice? Historians still debate whether these statues fell naturally due to earthquakes or erosion, or whether their downfall was deliberate, symbolic, and violent. You rise, brushing the dirt from your hands, and continue along the trail, your mind turning over the possibilities like stones in the surf. Theories abound, some supported by archaeological evidence, others leaning more toward the fantastical. But here, on the ground, in the presence of these broken titans, all theories feel strangely equal, each one another layer of mystery in an already unfathomable puzzle. The wind shifts again, this time carrying the distant sound of waves crashing against the cliffs. You're getting closer to the coast now, where the moai line the edges of the island like silent sentries, their backs turned to the sea, forever focused on the land and its people. But before you reach them, you take one last look back toward Rano Raraku, the quarry now a distant silhouette against the afternoon sky. The place where these giants were born, carved from the mountain's flank and then, somehow, made to walk. You shake your head, smiling at the sheer audacity of it all. Who needs aliens when humans are this inventive. With that thought lingering, you turn back to the path ahead, ready to encounter the Moai in their final positions, stamping, toppled, or somewhere in between. You approach one of the most iconic features of the island's ceremonial landscape, the ahu. These are the massive stone platforms upon which the Moai once stood or, in some cases, still stand. Defiant against centuries of weather, warfare, and neglect, the path levels out here, running parallel to the shoreline where jagged basalt cliffs plunge dramatically into the restless Pacific. The air is thick with the sound of waves smashing into stone, the spray drifting high enough to kiss your cheeks with cool salt. Standing before the ahu, you marvel at its sheer complexity. Dozens of precisely cut stones are stacked to form a base as much as 5 meters high, each block fitted with meticulous care. It's not just a pedestal, it's a sacred space. Archaeologists believe these platforms served as ceremonial centers, connecting the living with the spirits of their ancestors, whom the Moai embodied. You step closer, running your hand along the edge of a stone that has been in place for hundreds of years. It feels almost warm under the sun, the surface smoothed by time but still bearing faint tool marks. Quiet, testimony to the craftsmen who once labored here. The Moai that remain standing atop this ahu appear solemn and resolute. Their eyes, now empty sockets, once held coral and obsidian inlays, which gave them a piercing, almost supernatural gaze. You try to imagine standing here centuries ago, as a member of the Rapa Nui community, with these watchful figures looming above during rituals or clan gatherings. The Moai weren't just art, they were presence, protection, and power. One of the more curious things about these statues is that they all face inland, toward the villages they once watched over. None of them face the sea, save for a single group at Ahu Arkivi, located inland, whose gaze uniquely points toward the ocean. Historians still debate why that anomaly exists. Some argue for astronomical alignments, others for spiritual symbolism, but as usual with Rapa Nui, certainty is elusive. You step carefully around the ahu, mindful of the signs requesting visitors not to climb onto the platforms. It's tempting. Of course, you wouldn't be the first to imagine yourself perched dramatically beside a Moai, staring off into the horizon like some brooding explorer. But you resist, respecting both the cultural importance of the site and the practical consideration that breaking your ankle here would be extremely embarrassing. As you sit on a nearby boulder to take in the view, you reflect on the painstaking effort that must have gone into constructing these platforms. The Rapa didn't just erect statues. They engineered their environment, transforming the island's volcanic rock into an intricate network of ceremonial spaces. Some ahu even contained burial chambers within them, adding another layer of significance to these already symbolic structures. The debate among archaeologists continues. Were the ahu primarily religious monuments, political power statements, or something else entirely? Many lean toward a combination of these, seeing the ahu and their Moai as both spiritual guardians and emblems of clan prestige. The Rapa Nui, after all, lived in a highly stratified society, and nothing says we're in charge quite like a 30-ton stone effigy of your great-great-great-grandfather glaring at the neighbors. You stand and circle around to the back of the platform, where the landscape drops steeply into the surf. The waves thunder below, sending mist into the air in rhythm with the ocean's pulse. The Moai's backs are turned to the sea, their focus eternally locked on the land they once ruled. It's poetic, in a way, these statues of the dead watching over the living. Their silence more commanding than any shouted command, as you lean against a weathered outcrop. You notice something you hadn't before. Faint petroglyphs carved into the nearby stones. Stylized figures of birds, fish, and abstract shapes hint at layers of meaning beyond the monumental. While the Moai dominate Rapa Nui's landscape, the petroglyphs tell quieter stories of daily life, mythology, and ritual practices. Some archaeologists suggest that these carvings were part of a broader spiritual vocabulary, communicating messages we can only guess at now. The sea breeze carries a gust of mist over the Ahu, momentarily cloaking the statues in a veil of fog. For a heartbeat, they appear to blur and soften, their solid forms dissolving into the ether before the wind sweeps the fog away again. You exhale slowly, as if releasing a breath you didn't realize you were holding. There's a peculiar peace in this place, despite or perhaps because of the overwhelming presence of history. Every stone, every statue, every groove in the earth whispers fragments of the Rapa Nui story, but none of it is complete. The Moai stand silent, the Ahu endure, and you, a modern visitor, can only piece together guesses and echoes. You take one last look at the Ahu before turning back to the trail, ready to explore what other enigmas the island has in store. You follow the path further along the coast, your eyes drawn to something curious, a cluster of Moai unlike the others you've seen so far. Their heads are adorned with massive, cylindrical stone hats made from a striking red volcanic rock. You quicken your pace, eager to get a closer look at these peculiar features, known as pukao. Standing beneath one of these statues, you tilt your head back, squinting against the sun to take in the full ensemble. The stoic face, the elongated ears, the protruding belly and perched precariously on top, the enormous red pukao. Some of these weigh up to 12 tons, which raises an obvious question. How did they get them up there? Historians still debate the method. One theory suggests the pukao were rolled up earthen ramps and carefully levered into place atop the statues, though this would have required a combination of clever engineering, brute strength, and, let's be honest, and enormous tolerance for risk. One slip, and that 12-ton hat could crush someone flatter than a tortilla. You walk around the base of the Moai, noting how the pukao are made of a different type of volcanic stone, red scoria, softer and lighter than the greyish tuff used for most of the statues. This contrast in colour must have held symbolic significance. Some researchers speculate that the red colour represented sacredness or monospiritual power in Polynesian cultures. Others wonder if the hats were meant to depict hair tied up in top-knot's ass, was customary among high-ranking Rapa Nui men. You reach out and touch the base of a pukao fragment that has toppled to the ground nearby. The surface is rough but surprisingly porous, riddled with small holes and crevices. You imagine the original sculptors carving these cylindrical shapes with handheld tools, meticulously smoothing the edges before hoisting them up to crown their Moai. As you back away to get a wider view, you realize how much these pukao transform the silhouette of the statues. Without them, the Moai appear somber and stoic. With them, they gain an almost theatrical flair and air of defiant elegance, as if they're preparing for some ancient island gala. And yet, not all Moai have pukao. Only a fraction of the statues were adorned with these curious additions, leaving scholars to debate their exact meaning. Were they markers of social status, clan identifiers, pure aesthetics? As with so much on Rapa Nui, the truth remains frustratingly out of reach. You spot another Moai nearby, its pukao tilted precariously to one side, as though it's been caught mid-shrug. The sight makes you chuckle softly. For all their monumental grandeur. There's something inherently human about these statues, something almost relatable in their imperfections. A gust of wind tousles your hair as you gaze out toward the ocean. The waves roll in steadily, indifferent to your presence, just as they have been for millennia. The red hue of the pucao stands out vividly against the muted greens and greys of the island. Drawing your eyes back to the statues again and again, you recall reading that some scholars believe the placement of the pucao was a later development in Moai construction, possibly indicating an evolution in religious or cultural practices over time. This suggests that the Rapa Nui civilization wasn't static, but dynamic, adapting, innovating, and responding to internal changes and external pressures. You wander a bit further and find another fallen pucao, now partially buried in the earth and overgrown with grass. It's hard not to feel a little pang of melancholy at the sight. These artifacts, once symbols of reverence and craftsmanship, are now quiet ruins, slowly sinking back into the landscape. Leaning against a nearby rock, you close your eyes for a moment, imagining the island as it might have been centuries ago. Live with the sounds of carving, chanting, and communal effort. The Moai would have been standing proudly with their pucao freshly placed, gleaming in the sunlight. The focal points of complex social and religious rituals. A horse snorts somewhere behind you, snapping you back to the present. You smile, grateful. For the interruption, the Moai may be silent, but the island itself is very much alive. As you prepare to move on, you take one last, lingering glance at the statues with their distinctive red crowns. They are, perhaps, the most visually striking of all Rapa Nui's mystery testaments, not only to the ingenuity of the Rapa Nui people, but also to their enduring desire to leave something of themselves behind. You turn back to the path, the image of those red-topped giants etched firmly in your mind, as the wind carries the faint sound of distant waves further inland. You continue along the path, your steps falling into an easy rhythm as you approach one of the most somber and thought-provoking aspects of the island's history, the collapse of Rapa Nui society. The landscape around you begins to feel emptier, the grass sparser, the ground more worn. The statues here are often toppled, fractured, their once proud forms now lying silent and broken across the earth. It's impossible not to feel the weight of time here, or to wonder what exactly led to this civilization's dramatic transformation. The dominant theory for many years has been ecological collapse. According to this narrative, the Rapa Nui people, in their quest to construct and transport hundreds of Moai, deforested the island, depleting the palm forests that once covered much of the landscape. Without trees, they lost critical resources, building materials, fuel, and even the ability to make the canoes they needed for fishing. You pause to take in the desolate stretch of land before you, imagining it once lush with towering palms and flocks of seabirds nesting in the canopies. Now only hardy grasses and low shrubs remain, struggling against the relentless wind. It's a stark transformation, one that has often been cited as a cautionary tale of human overreacher, kind of prehistoric environmental parable. But as with nearly everything on this island, the truth is more complicated. Recent research challenges the narrative of self-inflicted collapse, pointing instead to other factors, invasive species, like rats, that prevented forest regrowth, soil erosion from natural climatic shifts, and the devastating impact of European contact, which introduced diseases, slavery, and a new wave of resource exploitation. You crouch beside a toppled Moai, its head severed cleanly from its body, and run your hand along the smooth break. Was this statue deliberately pushed over by rival clans in the turbulent years of social upheaval? Or did it fall victim to an earthquake, as some suggest? Historians still debate whether the collapse was primarily environmental, social, or a tragic combination of both. Standing again, you take a deep breath, the air crisp and tinged with the faint smell of sea salt. The narrative of Rapa Nui's decline is often simplified in textbooks. But here, among the broken remnants of an ancient society, it feels anything but simple. You walk on, following the faint remnants of ancient roads that once connected the islands, villages, and ceremonial sites. These roads, meticulously paved with stone, are yet another testament to the Rapa Nui's organizational skills and engineering prowess. Some researchers argue that these pathways were also ceremonial, designed not just for practical transport but as sacred routes guiding the Moai from quarry to Ahu.U. Can't help but imagine what it must have been like in those final years. Before the collapse, competing clans, dwindling resources, cultural and spiritual turmoil. The Moai, once symbols of unity and ancestral protection, may have become focal points of conflict. They're toppling both literal and symbolic acts of rebellion. In the distance, you spot a solitary figure walking across the barren field, a fellow traveler or perhaps a local guide. It's a reminder that despite everything, life continues here. The Rapa Nui people survived, their culture evolving and adapting in the face of unimaginable challenges. You stop by another cluster of statues, many face down in the dirt, and sit for a while on a nearby stone. The wind whistles past, the sound blending with the distant cries of seabirds overhead. It's peaceful here, but also undeniably melancholic, a place where history feels thick and present, like mist that refuses to lift. You think about the narrative threads that scholars have woven over the years, the rise of a complex, seafaring society, the monumental artistic achievements, the environmental missteps, the societal fractures, and, ultimately, the resilience of the people who remained. The story of Rapa Nui isn't just one of collapse, it's also one of survival. A wild horse trots lazily across the field, pausing to nibble at a patch of grass before flicking its tail and continuing on. You watch it go, marveling at how nature has reclaimed so much of this once bustling landscape. As you stand to leave, you glance back at the fallen Moai one more time. Even in their prone positions, these statues command a presence, their silence speaking volumes. They are both monuments and memorials, markers of a civilization's ambition and a testament to its vulnerability. You turn back to the path, your footsteps soft against the worn earth, carrying with you the sobering reminder that history is rarely as simple as the stories we tell about it. You continue along the winding path, moving away from the broken statues and barren fields, drawn now by a story passed down through generations. The legend of Hotu Matua. The name alone feels like an invocation, whispered by the wind as it rustles through the grass. According to oral tradition, Hotu Matua was the founding ancestor of the Rapa Nui people, the great navigator who led his people across vast, uncharted waters to this isolated speck of land in the Pacific. You stop for a moment on a rise overlooking the coast, gazing out at the endless expanse of ocean. It's hard to imagine anyone voluntarily sailing into this vast blue nowhere, yet that's exactly what the legend says happened. Hotu Matua, following prophetic visions, or perhaps simply the stubborn call of exploration, set out from a homeland, sometimes identified as Hiva in Polynesian lore, leading his people across thousands of kilometers of open water in double-hulled canoes. You take a deep breath of the salty air and picture the scene. The canoes slicing through the waves, the navigators reading the stars, the swells, the patterns of migrating birds. No compasses, no charts, just a deep, intimate knowledge of the sea. Historians still debate the precise origins of the Rapa Nui. Were they from the Marquesas Mangareva, another, now lost island? The legend offers poetic certainty. Archaeology offers fragmented clues. You step closer to a low stone platform, reputed by some to be one of the traditional landing sites of Hatu Matua. Whether or not this exact spot marks the historical arrival point doesn't really matter. What matters is standing here, feeling the same ocean breeze, the same isolation, the same sense of wonder and risk that must have defined that ancient voyage. Leaning against a weathered boulder, you reflect on how the legend of Hatu Matua doesn't just explain the peopling of Rapa Nui. It also establishes the social and spiritual framework that followed. He is said to have divided the island among his sons, setting the stage for the clan-based society that would later build the Moai and the Ahu. Every family, every ritual, every sacred space is, in some way, tied back to this mythic figure. You continue walking, the path leading inland through a small grove of eucalyptus trees. The rustle of their long, narrow leaves sounds like distant surf. It's an anachronism. Of course, these trees were introduced much later by European settlers, but they add to the sense of layers upon layers of history overlapping here. The story of Hatu Matua also includes the prophetic warning of a priest, or seer, who reportedly guided him to this new land as a place of refuge. According to the tale, the old homeland was doomed, consumed by war, disaster, or the sea itself. The exact details vary with each telling, but the core is always the same. A leader, a voyage, a new beginning. You stop at a clearing and sit for a moment on a flat stone, your gaze tracing the horizon where the ocean meets the sky. In this moment, it's easy to understand why myth and history blend so seamlessly here. On an island so small and remote, every landmark feels significant. Every story a necessary thread holding the culture together. A nearby plaque describes the genealogy traced back to Hatu Matua, connecting the modern Rapa Nui people to their legendary ancestor. Despite centuries of upheaval, European contact, slave raids, epidemics, this story endures. Passed down through chants, dances, and quiet family gatherings under starlit skies. You imagine a family seated around a fire, an elder recounting the tale of the great voyage, of courage and loss, of new landfall and the planting of the first crops in unfamiliar soil. The children listening would grow up knowing that their lives were part of something ancient and enduring. A seabird wheels overhead, its cry sharp against the hush of the afternoon. You look up, shielding your eyes, and for a moment it feels like a reminder, a living symbol of migration, resilience, and return. You stand again, brushing the dust from your pants, and resume your walk. The legend of Hatu Matua follows you like a quiet companion, a voice woven into the wind and stone of this extraordinary place. And as the path leads you onward, deeper, into the heart of the island, you realize that here, myth isn't just something people used to believe, it's something the landscape itself seems to remember. You keep moving inland, the path curving gently toward a site that feels even more enigmatic than the Moai themselves. The remnants of the Rongorongo script. You've read about it, of course, the mysterious glyphs carved into wooden tablets. The undeciphered language that some believe could hold the key to understanding Rapa Nui's deepest secrets. And now, standing before a small, protected exhibit displaying replicas of these ancient tablets. You feel the weight of an unsolved puzzle pressing in around you. You lean in close, examining the rows of intricate symbols, birdmen crescent, shapes, stylized fish, human figures with exaggerated limbs. The carvings are remarkably regular and rhythmic, as if the inscriber was reciting something sacred or habitual while working the blade into the wood. And yet, despite decades of scholarly effort, no one has definitively cracked the code. The glyphs remain silent, their meaning locked away. You take a breath, exhaling slowly as you trace the symbols with your eyes, wondering what they could say. Was this a religious text, a genealogy, a record of important events? Some researchers argue that Rongorongo represents a true writing system, a rare indigenous script developed independently in Polynesia. Others suggest it's more of a proto-writing, a mnemonic device to aid in oral storytelling. Historians still debate not just what the tablets say, but what they were even for. You walk slowly around the display, noting how some of the glyphs seem almost playful dancing figures, whimsical animal forms, while others appear more solemn, possibly ceremonial. The contrast adds to the enigma. Was Rongorongo a language for the elite, a tool for priests, a system accessible to all, or restricted to a privileged few? Leaning against the exhibit railing, you recall that most of the original tablets were lost or destroyed after European contact. Missionaries, seeing the carvings as pagan artifacts, encouraged their use as firewood. Others were taken by collectors, scattered in museums across the globe. Fewer than 30 authentic Rongorongo tablets survive today, none of them on the island itself. The replicas here serve as both homage and haunting reminder. You step outside the small museum structure into the breeze, thinking about how much of Rapa Nui's story is told through loss of language, of forests, of cultural continuity. And yet, despite that, fragments like Rongorongo persist, daring the world to pay attention, to try and understand. You sit for a moment on a low wall nearby, watching as a pair of children run past, their laughter sharp and bright against the muted tones of the landscape. It strikes you how life continues here, vibrantly, even as so much of the island's past remains shrouded in mystery. The presence of Rongorongo also complicates the popular narrative of Rapa Nui's isolation. If the script was developed independently, it would stand as one of the very few instances of an original writing system in human history. Some scholars have pointed to possible external influences, visits by South Americans. Perhaps, but these theories remain speculative and controversial. You glance up at the sky, watching as clouds begin to gather, casting shifting shadows across the island's low hills. The soft grey light makes the landscape feel even older, more timeless, as if the island itself is withholding its secrets just a little longer. You stand and stretch, preparing to continue your journey. But before you leave, you take one last look at the replica tablets, their glyphs etched deeply into the wood, stubbornly defying interpretation. You can almost imagine one of the ancient inscribers sitting cross-legged on the ground, a sharp tool in hand, methodically carving each symbol while the wind whipped through the grasses nearby, and aware that centuries later, people from all over the world would stand here, puzzling over these same marks. With that thought lingering in your mind, you turn back to the path, your steps quiet against the stone as you leave the mysterious language behind, unsolved, but not unappreciated. You follow the trail as it dips lower into a rugged part of the island, where jagged volcanic formations rise up like the spines of some ancient, slumbering beast. The air here feels cooler, denser, and you know you're approaching one of Rapa Nui's lesser-known features, the network of hidden caves. Unlike the dramatic open spaces of the Ahu or the solemn grandeur of the Moai, these caves offer a more intimate glimpse into the lives of the island's former inhabitants. Some were shelters, others places of ritual, refuge, or even burial. You duck beneath a low rock overhang, stepping carefully into the mouth of one of these volcanic tubes, your footsteps muffled by the loose soil and scattered debris. Inside, the air shifts cooler, damper, with a faint mineral temps. You let your eyes adjust to the gloom, taking in the irregular walls, smoothed over centuries by both natural forces and human hands. Light from the entrance slants in sharply, illuminating patches of lichen and the occasional tuft of grass that managed to sneak its way inside. You pause, listening to the silence, the kind of silence that presses in around you, as if the cave itself is holding its breath. It's easy to imagine ancient Rapa Nui families huddled here during storms or conflict, their voices hushed, the flicker of firelight dancing across the rough stone walls. You run your hand along the cool surface, finding faint carvings etched deep into the rock-simple shapes, human figures, stylized birds. Petroglyphs like these appear in caves all over the island, often associated with the island's most mysterious religious tradition, the Tangata Manu, or Birdman cult. Historians still debate the full significance of these carvings. Were they markers of ritual activity, clan symbols, protective talismans? Some researchers believe that certain caves served as sanctuaries during the later period of Rapa Nui's history, when inter-clan conflict led to widespread violence and the collapse of the Moai building culture. You stoop lower, venturing deeper into the cave. The passage narrows, forcing you to move sideways, carefully avoiding loose stones and slick patches of moss. A stray thought crosses your mind. How many people throughout history have passed through this very tunnel? And how many never came out? You smirk at your own melodrama, but the cave's oppressive quiet makes it feel oddly plausible. The idea of these underground spaces as both sanctuary and trap is almost too poetic to ignore. Emerging into a slightly larger chamber, you straighten up and take a deep breath, your voice echoing softly as you exhale. From here, a narrow skylight filters sunlight into the space, casting long beams that illuminate the walls and reveal more petroglyphs. The Birdman motif appears again, a human figure with outstretched arms, curved to suggest wings. The presence of these images deep underground adds another layer to the island's enigmatic culture. The Birdman cult, which rose to prominence after the decline of Moai construction, centered around an annual competition to retrieve the first egg of the sooty tern from the offshore islet of Motu Nui. The winner would become the Tangata Manu, the Birdman, a title that conferred spiritual and political power. You linger here, imagining the secretive ceremonies that might have taken place in caves like this, chants echoing off the stone, torches illuminating painted walls, offerings made to unseen forces. Some historians argue that these caves also served as burial sites, protecting the bones of ancestors from desecration. Archaeological excavations have uncovered human remains in some of these caves, suggesting they held not only the living but also the dead. You move cautiously toward another passage, noting how the ceiling dips dangerously low. The labyrinthine nature of these volcanic tubes makes it easy to see how they could serve as both refuge and entrapment. A wrong turn, a collapse, or even just a moment of panic in the dark could spell disaster. Stepping carefully, you exit the cave through a different opening than the one you entered, blinking against the sudden brightness of the afternoon sun. The world outside feels expansive, open, almost jarringly so after the close confines of the cave. You stand for a moment, catching your breath, your heart still beating just a little faster from the subterranean adventure. The waves crash distantly against the cliffs, seabirds wheel overhead, and the landscape stretches out in rolling green and volcanic black. Looking back at the cave's dark mouth, you feel a quiet gratitude for light, for space, for the chance to emerge. And you realize that for the Rapa Nui who once used these caves, the experience would have been much the same, a place of protection, but also of reverence, of mystery, and perhaps even of fear. You turn and continue along the path, the cave fading behind you, another layer of Rapa Nui's history experienced but still only partially understood. You walk further along the windswept trail, the grass underfoot rippling like an emerald. See as you approach another critical chapter in the island's long and layered history, the arrival of the first Europeans. For centuries, Rapa Nui existed, in complete isolation, its culture evolving in splendid seclusion. But that changed in 1722, when Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen and his crew stumbled upon the island on Easter Sunday. Hence the name Easter Island, though the locals, of course, have always called it Rapa Nui. You pause at a bluff overlooking the ocean, imagining the scene as the European ships appeared on the horizon for the first time, tall masts slicing into the blue, strange flags fluttering in the wind. For the islanders, it must have been a sight both wondrous and terrifying. Visitors from a world they never knew existed, stepping ashore in unfamiliar clothes, armed with unfamiliar weapons. The initial encounter was, predictably, tense. Historical accounts describe how Roggeveen's crew fired upon a group of Rapa Nui, killing several. Why? Miscommunication, fear, cultural misunderstanding, all the usual tragic reasons. You sit on a flat rock, staring out at the endless Pacific, and think about how that single, violent interaction marked the beginning of Rapa Nui's slow and painful entanglement with the outside world. After Roggeveen's brief and bloody visit, other European explorers followed, the Spanish, the French, the British. Each left their mark, their accounts filling the journals of Western history, while often disregarding the voices of the Rapa Nui themselves. These expeditions brought not just curiosity, but also disease, new plants and animals, and a cascade of disruptions to the island's delicate balance. You shift your gaze inland to the fields and hills dotted with moai, wondering how the Rapa Nui reacted to these sudden arrivals. Did they see the Europeans as gods, as some accounts suggest, or as intruders, as seems more likely? Historians still debate the details, pointing out that many early reports are colored by the prejudices and fantasies of the explorers who wrote them. You stand and walk slowly toward a site where early European artifacts have been found, rusted, nails, fragments of tools, pieces of rope. The remains are humble, almost insignificant compared to the grandeur of the moai. Yet they signal a momentous shift, the end of Rapa Nui's isolation and the start of a new, fraught chapter, one particularly tragic legacy of European contact was the eventual slave raids of the 19th century. In the 1860s, Peruvian slave traders abducted as much as half of the island's population, including many of the knowledge keepers' priests, artisans, and elders. With them went invaluable cultural knowledge, oral traditions, and possibly the last fluent readers of the Rongorongo script. You let out a long breath, the wind whipping your jacket as you process the enormity of that loss. The Moai still stand or lie broken, but the living culture that built them was forever altered. A group of seabirds explodes into the air nearby, their white wings flashing in the sunlight. You watch them rise and fall in perfect formation, a brief, chaotic dance before they settle again on the rocky shore. Not all impacts of European contact were immediate or catastrophic. Some were more subtle but equally transformative. The introduction of Christianity, new agricultural techniques, and new political structures. Over time, these layered onto the existing Rapa Nui culture, creating the complex, hybrid society that exists today. You continue walking, your footsteps light against the weathered stones. The debate among scholars persists. Was the collapse of Rapa Nui society inevitable, driven by internal factors like environmental mismanagement and social conflict? Or was it accelerated or even primarily caused by the disruptions of European contact? As always here, the answer is not simple, and the more you consider it, the more you realize that the story of Rapa Nui is neither one of pure tragedy nor pure resilience, but something in between. You pause at another vantage point, where a reconstructed Ahu has been carefully restored by archaeologists and local community members. This site, standing proudly against the backdrop of the ocean, feels like a quiet act of defiance, a statement that, despite everything, the island's history and spirit endure. You smile faintly at the thought and take a last look at the sea, remembering that this very water carried not just the ancestors of the Rapa Nui, but also the strangers who would irrevocably change their world. Then, turning back to the inland path, you let the sound of the waves recede behind you as you continue your journey through this remarkable landscape, the past trailing after you with every step. You follow the trail as it bends back inland, away from the relentless crash of the waves, and toward a quieter part of the island, where modern excavations and interpretations attempt to piece together the enigma of the Moai. Here, the landscape is dotted with the signs of contemporary archaeological work, carefully placed flags marking dig sites, wooden walkways protecting fragile ground, and the occasional cluster of tents where researchers camp during their field seasons. You pause by one such site, watching as a group of archaeologists sift meticulously through the soil, trowels in hand, brushes poised delicately over ancient stones. It's a strange juxtaposition, the ancient and the modern, side by side. The archaeologists in their breathable synthetic fabrics and technical boots, and the statues, silent, unyielding, still rooted in the earth that has held them for centuries. Walk around the perimeter, noting the partially unearthed base of a Moai, its torso barely visible above the dirt. Many visitors don't realize that what they see of these statues is often just the beginning. Most Moai extend several meters underground, their bodies elaborately carved with details hidden by centuries of sediment. Standing here, it's easy to imagine how many secrets remain buried just out of reach. Historians still debate the ultimate purpose of the Moai. Were they primarily religious icons, designed to house the spirits of ancestors? Or were they political symbols, projections of power by competing clans? Perhaps they were both. You stand thoughtfully by one of the informational plaques, reading about recent theories suggesting that Moai construction might have been an elaborate way of building social cohesion, as much about the process of carving and moving the statues as about the final product. You chuckle softly at the thought community bonding through massive, back-breaking stone transport. Forget trust falls and corporate retreats. This is the kind of team-building exercise that separates the truly committed from the casually interested. Stepping further along the trail, you pass another display outlining a recent study that used soil analysis to determine that many of the areas around the Moai platforms were highly fertile, possibly cultivated with sweet potatoes and other crops. This suggests that the Ahu sites weren't just ceremonial spaces, but also hubs of practical daily life. Another layer complicating the simplistic view of the Moai as mere religious artifacts. You sit for a moment on a nearby bench, letting the weight of all these interpretations settle around you. It's clear that the story of the Moai is still being written. Their meanings continuously reinterpreted through new data, new perspectives, and new technologies. A few steps away, a tour guide explains to a small group how ground-penetrating radar has revealed previously unknown features beneath several statues. The guide's voice is low, almost reverent, as he describes how these technologies are allowing archaeologists to see without digging, preserving the integrity of the sites while expanding knowledge. You glance back at the archaeologists working steadily in the afternoon heat, and for a moment you feel a quiet kinship with them, all of you standing on the same ground, staring at the same stones, asking the same unanswerable questions. You walk onward, the trail leading you past a series of reconstructed Ahu, where Moai had been carefully re-erected after centuries of lying toppled. The restorations are impressive, the statues once again standing tall against the backdrop of volcanic hills and the vast sky. But they also raise questions. Some scholars argue that re-erecting the Moai removes them from their historical context, turning them into tourist attractions rather than preserving them as archaeological evidence of past events. The debate is ongoing. Is it better to restore these monuments to their former glory, or to leave them as they were found, toppled and broken, silent witnesses to the island's turbulent history? You stand at the base of one of these restored Moai, looking up into its impassive face. The restoration is flawless. The joints between the original and replacement stones barely noticeable. Still, you can't help but wonder what the statue would think of its new role. Less spiritual protector, more Instagram backdrop. Nearby, a group of tourists takes turns posing dramatically in front of the statue, their laughter carried away by the wind. You smile faintly, not in judgment, but in quiet recognition of the complicated relationship modern society has with the past. We want to preserve it, to learn from it, but also to experience it, to stand in its shadow and feel, for a moment, connected to something vast and ancient. You take a last look at the site before continuing along the trail. The echoes of academic debates, tourist snapshots, and ancient rituals all swirling together in this extraordinary place. You walk further along the dusty path, your steps light as the trail leads you toward the more eccentric side of Rapa Nui's story, the world of theories that stretch far beyond what archaeology can comfortably explain. The so-called alternative. Theories about the Moai and the island's history are as much a part of the island's mystique as the statues themselves, ranging from the imaginative to the outright absurd. You stop at a small overlook, gazing across a field dotted with scattered Moai fragments, and consider the most famous of these alternative explanations, that the Moai and, perhaps even the island's, civilization were influenced, or outright built, by extraterrestrials. Yes, aliens. You smirk, because how could you not? The ancient astronaut theory, made infamous by television specials and pseudo-academic paperbacks, suggests that early humans couldn't possibly have developed the ingenuity and technology required to create and move these colossal statues on their own. Surely, they argue, advanced beings from beyond the stars must have lent a helping tentacle or tractor beam. You lean against a large boulder and watch as a seabird drifts lazily overhead, unaffected by the ongoing debates of humanity. The bird probably has no opinion on alien architects, and neither, you suspect, do the Moai. The allure of these theories is understandable. The island's extreme isolation, the monumentality of the statues, and the mysteries surrounding their construction and transportation all create the perfect conditions for flights of fancy. But standing here, surrounded by the raw materials, the volcanic tuff, the fragmented statues here, reminded that the simplest explanation is often the most compelling: human ingenuity, patience, and collaboration. Still, you can't deny that there's a certain charm to the more outlandish ideas. Besides aliens, there are theories about lost civilizations, like Lemuria or Mu, whose supposed survivors traveled across oceans to seed monumental architecture worldwide. From the pyramids of Egypt to the stone heads of Rapa Nui, historians and archaeologists rolled their eyes at such notions, pointing instead to clear evidence of Polynesian migration patterns, sophisticated navigational skills, and complex social organization that explain how and why the Moai were built. Yet, the debate continues in late-night forums, speculative books, and social media threads filled with grainy photos and breathless speculation. You continue walking, the wind tugging gently at your sleeves, and pass by a weathered sign that humorously reads, "No alien parking." It's a cheeky nod to the island's embrace of its more eccentric fans, proof that even the locals can appreciate a good myth, so long as it's taken with a grain of volcanic salt. The more grounded but still unconventional theories revolve around lost technologies, forgotten methods of transporting the Moai that modern archaeologists have yet to rediscover. Some suggest the use of advanced rope systems and lubricated sleds. Others hypothesize about massive communal efforts, with hundreds of people coordinating in precise rhythms to move the statues upright across uneven terrain. You stop by a particularly large Moai fragment lying broken in the grass, and imagine the ancient scene: dozens of workers hauling this immense figure across the island, chanting in unison, the statue swaying from side to side as it walked to its destination. No aliens require just determination, coordination, and perhaps an exceptional tolerance for sore shoulders. You sit for a moment, letting the sun warm your back, and consider why these alternative theories persist. Maybe it's because people are naturally drawn to mystery, to the idea that there's more to the story than what meets the eye. Or maybe it's because we sometimes underestimate the capabilities of those who came before us, projecting our own sense of technological superiority onto the past. A nearby tour guide is explaining to a small group how experimental archaeology has demonstrated that the walking theory is feasible, using replicas of Moai moved with ropes by coordinated teams. The tourists nod, some impressed, others skeptical, proof that, even in the face of evidence, myths can be surprisingly resilient. You stand again, brushing dust from your pants, and smile at the thought that, regardless of the truth, the legends of aliens, lost countenance, and mysterious ancient wisdom have become part of the island's story now too, woven into its modern identity. As you continue along the trail, the Moai standing silently in the distance, you realize that perhaps it Doesn't matter whether the most far-fetched theories are true or not. They reflect our desire to connect, to understand, to fill in the gaps with imagination when facts feel too sparse. And here, on Rapa Nui, where so many questions remain unanswered, maybe that's just part of the human condition, the need for a little bit of mystery in our monuments. You walk on the trail winding gently toward a part of the island where past and present intersect in the most visible way. The efforts to preserve Rapa Nui's heritage in the face of growing tourism and environmental change. Ahead, a small group of visitors is gathered near a roped-off section of eroded ground, where a fragile Moai fragment lies cradled by supports, its surface meticulously shielded from the elements by conservation fabric. You pause a respectful distance away, watching as a conservator carefully brushes debris from the stone's surface. The precision of the work is impressive, almost reverent. Here, preservation isn't just about preventing further erosion. It's about maintaining a connection to a culture that has endured for centuries. Looking around, you notice discreet signs posted along the path. Stay on designated trails. Do not climb the Moai. Respect the sacred sites. They are gentle but firm reminders that, while the Moai might seem stoic and unyielding, they are also fragile, worn down, not just by centuries of wind and rain, but also by the relentless march of modern tourism. You glance across the landscape at a tour group snapping selfies in front of a restored ahu, their voices lively, their poses dramatic. It's a scene that plays out daily across the island, as thousands of visitors come to marvel at the statues, to check an item off their bucket lists, to experience a brush with mystery. The influx of tourism, has been both a blessing and a burden for Rapa Nui. The local economy depends on it, providing jobs and revenue that support conservation, infrastructure, and education. But at the same time, the sheer volume of visitors places stress on the very resources and sites that people come to see. You sit for a moment on a stone bench overlooking the coastline, thinking about the delicate balance at play here, preserving the island's cultural and archaeological treasures while sharing them with a global audience. It's no easy task. Some efforts have been remarkably successful. The island was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1995, a recognition that brought both international attention and funding for preservation projects. Local governance has also played a critical role, with the Rapa Nui community increasingly taking the lead in managing and protecting their own heritage. You smile at that thought. The people who descend from those who carved the Moai now standing as their protectors, ensuring that future generations can continue to experience these monuments, not just as relics, but as living parts of their cultural identity. Yet challenges remain. Climate change is accelerating coastal erosion, threatening several ahu and Moai situated near the shoreline. Rising sea levels and increasingly intense storms pose new risks that ancient builders never could have anticipated. Researchers and conservationists are now racing against time, implementing protective measures like seawalls and drainage, improvements to safeguard the statues. You stand and wander toward a newer section of the trail, where interpretive signs explain some of these efforts. Diagrams show how water management systems are being installed to prevent flooding, how vegetation is being managed to reduce root damage to archaeological layers. Reading the signs, you're struck by how much of the island story is still being shaped not just by those who originally carved and raised the Moai, but by those working tirelessly to keep them standing nearby. A Rapa Nui guide is explaining to a group of visitors how traditional knowledge and modern science are being combined to address the island's challenges. Her voice is calm but passionate, weaving together strands of history, culture, and environmental stewardship into a single, coherent narrative. You listen for a while, then continue along the trail, reflecting on the paradox of Rapa Nui, an ancient civilization's monumental legacy, now dependent on the very modern forces of tourism, global cooperation, and environmental science. As you pass another preserved Moai, standing resolutely against the backdrop of volcanic cliffs, you realize that the statue's survival is no longer just about enduring the elements, it's about how people choose to value and care for them. You pause, take a deep breath, and glance one last time at the conservators working carefully in the distance. Their small, deliberate movements ensuring that these silent giants will continue to inspire awe and wonder for centuries to come. Then, turning back to the path you walk on, the sea breeze cool against your face, the sound of waves mingling with distant voices, and the knowledge that this remarkable place remains very much alive. You continue along the path, the afternoon light beginning to soften, casting long shadows across the landscape as you approach the end of your journey. The trail leads you to a quiet overlook, a place where you can pause and reflect on everything you've seen: the solemn Moai standing vigil, the broken statues lying silently in the grass, the caves that once sheltered lives and rituals, and the modern efforts to keep all of it standing for future generations. You sit on a low stone wall, gazing out at the Pacific stretching endlessly before you. The ocean here is a constant presence, vast and indifferent, just as it has been since the first Rapa Nui navigators steered their canoes onto these shores. From this vantage point, you can almost trace their journey from distant islands across impossible expanses of water, guided only by the stars, the winds, and an indomitable will. Behind you, the statues remain, some upright, some toppled, all silent. They've outlasted their makers, survived ecological shifts, social upheaval, and centuries of isolation. And yet, despite their endurance, they refuse to give up their final secrets. You think about the riddles left unsolved, the exact methods of transportation, the intended meanings of the Rongorongo script, the full story of the Birdman cult, and the precise reasons behind the societal transformations that shaped this island's fate. Historians still debate whether Rapa Nui's story is one of triumph or tragedy, of ingenuity or self-destruction. But standing here, you can feel that it's all of those things at once and more. It's a story about people striving to shape their world, to leave a legacy in stone, to anchor themselves against the vastness of nature and time. You turn to face the Moai one last time, their profiles etched sharply against the sky. They don't answer your questions, of course. They just stand, as they always have, staring inland, their expressions heavy with a kind of timeless patience. A breeze stirs the grass at your feet, and a seabird calls in the distance. Life continues, quietly, insistently, even as the monuments of the past loom large in the present. You stand slowly, stretching your legs, and begin to make your way back down the trail, knowing that you're leaving with more questions than when you arrived. But maybe that's how it should be. Perhaps the true gift of Rapa Nui isn't answers, but the invitation to wonder as the light continues to fade. You cast one final glance over your shoulder at the Moai, their forms now silhouetted against the darkening sky. They remain exactly as they were when you arrived, silent, enigmatic, eternal dot. And with that, you turn away, letting the mysteries of Easter Island settle quietly into your memory, where they will linger long after your footsteps have faded from the path. Asterisk, asterisk, the trail grows quieter with each step, the hum of distant waves now a soft murmur against the shore. Your breath slows, your muscles relax, and the landscape stretches around you in muted tones of grey and green. The statues, those ancient sentinels, recede into the distance, their silence no longer heavy but comforting, as if they've always known you'd eventually walk away. The air is cool now, the last rays of sunlight filtering through thin, wispy clouds, painting the horizon in soft pastels of peach and lavender. You pause for a moment to take it all in, the gentle rustle of grass, the rhythmic lap of the ocean, the faint cries of seabirds settling in for the night. You exhale, long and slow, letting your thoughts drift like mist across the hills. Here, surrounded by so much history and quiet, you feel safe, grounded, part of something infinitely larger than yourself. The stones, the sea, the wind all continue as they always have, steady and unchanged by the passing of time. As you make your way back, the path soft beneath your feet, you carry with you not just memories of the statues and the mysteries they guard, but also the calm they inspire. A reminder that some questions don't need answers, they simply need space. And as you reach the end of the trail, stepping once more into the world beyond Rapa Nui, you feel a deep, enduring peace. Sleep well, traveler.